you're big on environment, you're big on climate change. A lot of people are really worried. Now, I've always been an environmentalist myself. Green Party is the only party I've ever registered for. I've denounced the Green Party since the COVID pandemic. We'll get into that, but the climate. So I've always been an environmentalist. When I was young, I helped. I proposed legislation, anti-deforestation legislation, when I was 11 years old. Put me on a terrorist watch list, by the way, because that was in the 90s when they said that.
Yes.
In the early 90s and 90 and 91, when the environmental movement was like Earth First, they were thinking of people chaining themselves, and
Mhm.
blowing things
Mhm.
up. And so I was like, I was an 11-year-old and I was caring
Oh my
about the
God.
environment, and they were looking at me like, who's backing her, who's dealing with her. But I was like, just doing it on my own. But so I've always been really big on environment, cleaning up the environment, clean water, clean air. When things but then climate is a different aspect of, they're not the same. There's environment and there's climate. These are two separate issues. A lot of people, like in my home state of Idaho, which is a very conservative
Mm,
Republican state,
mm,
are
mm,
environmentalists. I would say a lot of people in Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, these regions that are conservative are actually environmentalist focused people. They
yeah,
want clean environments. They care about their nature. They love their camping. They love their
yeah.
lakes and their rivers, and they want to maintain those. Climate is a different situation, and this one has been utilized. So people are really, more skeptical of the climate narrative. They feel like, okay, maybe there's climate change, maybe it's not that big of a deal, or maybe the planet will warm a little bit and we'll just live in a slightly warmer. Maybe there'll be some slight shifts, but the Earth does that. But the bigger concern, whether people think there's truly a climate change crisis or not, the bigger concern is people are worried about that climate change agenda being used as an agenda for
Mhm,
control of people,
mhm,
for control of other
mhm,
countries, for
mhm,
used to debilitate other countries' growth and their ability to become industrious and to
mhm,
compete with the West,
mhm.
with the big nations. So how do you balance that? WEF. You got Brazil. You've got Brazil saying, "Hey, you guys are just trying to stop us from becoming a big power, from becoming, like the United States and South America, by telling us we can't be industrious. We have to slow down our industry because of climate change." So how do you balance all of that? Do you think that this is policies you would enact just for Americans? Would you want to press the world to make change and put like sanctions on other countries, but until they change their behavior? Like what do you envision?
All really good points. And let me just say that I think that the environmental movement has really been significantly hijacked by a kind of green capitalism, which is not actually about the environment at all, but rather about creating a new industry and
Hmm.
bringing that industry to prominence and kind of capitalizing on resources all over the world to expand its control. I mean, and like the Bill Gates, concept of food security and agricultural production and stuff is like it's nuts. It's terrible, and it's all about domination and usurping land in other countries. And you have this agenda now that I think Biden represents, which is all about promoting renewable energy, but keeping his friends in the fossil fuel industry. And actually, the climate doesn't care about renewable energy. The climate cares about CO2 in the atmosphere and the warming of the planet. So he's not doing actually what needs to be done. And he actually is finding kind of, just creating a scenario for a kind of economic boondoggle for his friends. And that's a disaster. And it also, it doesn't solve the problem, and it completely undermines the credibility of the movement. So witness the Inflation Reduction Act. The Inflation Reduction Act is actually a fossil fuels first bill. And if you get beneath the headlines, you see that it actually requires 60 million acres offshore to be um, auctioned off every year before any renewable projects can be built. So in other words, you have to really build out fossil fuels um, according to the Inflation Reduction Act. And you're using up 60 million acres of offshore in the Gulf largely, and off of Alaska. So you're devastating environments and the oceans and the shoreline and wreaking havoc on local communities in order to build out fossil fuels under this excuse that the Inflation Reduction Act is going to bring more electric vehicles. But sorry, electric vehicles are not going to solve the problem. And they're also not affordable for lots of people. We actually need good quality, accessible public transportation, which is, powered by renewable energy. So that's why we talk about a real Green New Deal, a Green New Deal that actually creates jobs that are good for communities and good for workers, and that don't just provide a boondoggle for the industry. And I should add, the Inflation Reduction Act also provides for 2 million acres of onshore public land to be auctioned off before any renewables will be built. So it's really kind of a Trojan horse for more destructive energy. But there's one other thing I really want to put on the table, and that is what this means to everyday people. There are some people who don't buy the climate because of all the hype, kind of the PR campaigns surrounding it. And I attribute a lot of that to the big money and the industries here, as opposed to the real actual needs of the climate and the frontline communities. If you look at if you've been lucky enough that you haven't been hit by a heat wave, heat waves, which are devastating in some areas of the country, you haven't yet been hit by a drought or by superstorms that have destroyed your home or your community. If you haven't been hit yet, you're lucky. But there's more coming, and it's coming very soon. And the evidence for that, for example, if you just Google the Colorado River, which supplies the water for half of the fruits and vegetables in the country, that's on its way out. The Colorado River is just about at a critical level where it will no longer get over the dam and into the water system to feed Colorado and all that, but also California. So it's the California agriculture system. And that's about to go into complete all-out crisis here, which is going to hit us very hard. Just in terms of food prices in this country, we're going to see that really shoot up. And then you have accelerating ice melt, especially in the Antarctic, that now threatens us with maybe greatly accelerated sea level rise that will hit coastal communities. So that won't hit you in Iowa. But in Iowa, you're going to get hit by changing climate patterns. And farmers right now are dealing with pipelines that are intruding into their farmland all over the place because there are industries that want to basically pipe carbon for sequestration, which is another scam. That's an industry scam that will basically, convey public money to this industry that actually doesn't save carbon. It doesn't sequester it. It doesn't bring carbon down out of the atmosphere. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors going on now under the guise of climate policy.
Right.
And I think we have to be really clear about what is and what isn't a threat and how do we fix this in a way that benefits the American people.
I think what people are most concerned about, what voters are most concerned about, is whether or not you're going to limit them individually or limit the farmers individually. Like for example, what we saw in Sri Lanka and in the Netherlands, which is they told the small farmers you can't use, certain fertilizers, and ultimately, and that you have to do these other mechanisms. And really, these small farms were like, well, only the big farms and the big corporations have the land and the ability to do that. We don't. So it put a lot of family small farms out of business. People are worried individually that they're going to be forced into these 15-minute cities, or that they're going to be told they have to buy an electric car, for example, when they can't afford it because they are expensive. And so then people are worried about, people are very, they say, okay, I want to do good. I like doing good, but not if it's going to come at it's going to force me out of business.
Oh,
it's
absolutely.
going to force me into poverty, into devastation, or things I can't really do.
And the same
right.
goes for workers in this country who are very worried that they're going to lose their good paying jobs in the fossil fuel industry, and they're going to wind up working in these non-union, low-wage, abusive jobs in renewable energy. So these two cannot be separated from each other. And that's kind of built into the Green New Deal, that principles of justice and sustainability have to be a part of